If you could all take your seats, we'll get started. All right, welcome everyone to the 2023 Senior Thesis Presentations Day 2. Hard to believe we're here already. The goal of the Senior Thesis presentation is to function as a capstone, a culmination of our humanities program here at Annapolis. At Annapolis, we value excellence in speech. Our God created the world through speech. Our Lord Jesus is referred to as the very Word of God. Speech is central to what we do, and rhetoric, the art of good men and women speaking well, is something that is near and dear to our hearts. These students have researched all year a topic of their choice, written a 12 to 15-page paper, and are now poised to present a speech that's formed from the paper to you. Today we have two young rhetoricians speaking, Ian Mills and Alex Lopez. With that, I'd like to invite Shai up to the podium to introduce Alex.
Hi, my name is Shai. Today I have the honor and privilege of introducing my friend Alex. Alex has been attending Annapolis since the 6th grade and will be attending Texas A&M College Station and will be majoring in business. She's an amazing friend, teammate, and person who will definitely go on to do great things. Her senior thesis topic is about what a person should consider when debating the college question. So please help me welcome to the stage Alex Lopez.
Thank you, Shai. Millions of people every year across the United States go to college without a second thought. But why? Why choose to prolong your entrance into the world? Why not enter the workforce? Have you ever stopped to question, why go to college at all? What makes you think that it just won't be a total waste of time and money? College. It is something that has stumbled into every teenager's mind at some point in their lives. Whether with a definite, I'm not going, or yes, I am going to college. However, there's a chunk of people that are on the fence. They don't know if going to college is worth the time and investment. So instead, they feel it might be simply better if they just worked straight out of high school and pursued their career in that way. Those that chose to work over college often value experience and hands-on learning rather than sitting in a classroom. Now, a lot of young adults tend to feel on the fence because they feel undue pressure from society to go to college. Society tells us that in order to be successful in your field of work, you must attend college and pursue a degree in that field. 86% of college students feel pressure to pursue a college degree. Most of them said it was from their family, parents, guardians, and society, meaning 80% of college students didn't choose to attend on their own accord or for their own reasons. If you do choose to attend, how do you know you are going for the right reasons? In what follows, I will be discussing that the decision to attend college is a lot more complicated and intricate than one might seem to think. And in taking this decision, you must not only think about the financial aspect, but also the way that college education forms the individual and also the overall education philosophy of the institution. Of course, there are questions throughout your life where an absolute yes and no are the most suitable responses. For instance, yes, you should brush your teeth, and no, you shouldn't steal. But of course, in life, there are exceptions, one being college. The question of, should I go to college, does not warrant a definite yes or an absolute no in every single case. When contemplating this decision, you must know that there are a plethora of things to consider in your decision. The first thing I want you to consider is if your degree has a positive financial return. Choosing to attend is an investment, and with each investment, there's a risk value, but there's also a chance for great reward. Thus, it is essential to include in your consideration if going to college is worth the risk and the reward. The danger is that you end up in a massive amount of debt by the end of your 4 years of college and have yet to gain knowledge whatsoever. And the reward is that your money was put to good use, and now you're pursuing a degree that you love. Not all majors are worth attending university if the goal is monetary return alone. These are the degrees in the humanities because these majors tend to have a negative return on investment, while degrees that provide technical training often earn the highest and have the largest percent of financial return. Now, let me give you some statistics. If you plan on graduating within 4 years and don't plan to pursue a doctorate or a master's, the average total cost of attending a public in-state university is $109,320 $109,320. No one can deny that is a lot of money. So before you dismiss it, you should consider the advantages of pursuing a degree. On average, those who graduate with a bachelor's degree earn significantly more than those who graduate with a high school diploma. 28% of programs have a negative return on investment, meaning that those who do choose to participate in these programs will be financially worse off because they chose to participate in them. The rank of these programs is subject to change, but often more times than not, engineering and computer majors will always be the most lucrative majors, while majors like art and religion tend to have a smaller paycheck. Another reason why you should consider the financial return of attending university is because of God's call for us to be stewards. Christian stewardship refers to the responsibility that Christians have in maintaining and using the gifts bestowed by God. But what exactly does it mean for someone when they are considering the college decision? One must need to know if their career path will be able to provide for their family and for themselves. How can one be a steward and take care of a family with a large amount of debt on their back? That weight will keep them fulfilling their responsibilities to both man and God. Christ has called some of us to attend college, to pursue a field in which we have gifts and desires. For others, he has not called us to attend, but instead has called us to do other great things. If you believe that Christ has called you to attend college, then you must also consider the moral decision in addition to the financial aspect. Thus, the second thing I want you to consider when making the college decision is the moral question. When one thinks of attending college, it is often with the mindset of pursuing something higher, as it should be. You are paying for an education based on the career you wish to pursue and the type of person you wish to become. In hindsight, it all sounds simple. Pick a college and go into the field you wish to have a job in. However, it's not that easy. When thinking about where to apply, or even if you want to go, one must think if this university will make you a better, more well-rounded person, and if it would hold to your morals and beliefs. The culture of the college should be a factor when making one's decision. Culture is defined as the customs, practices, arts, social behaviors, and achievements of any people, nation, social group. If practices and values reflect the culture, and if their values are toxic, that would mean their culture is toxic. So why invest in an environment that could potentially taint your Christian values and lead you down the wrong path? Dr. Gary Dell, faculty director of the School of Business at American Public University, states, "Cultures derive not from one source, but the totality of circumstances at any given time. And it is ultimately the interplay among these factors that drives the zeitgeist, which simply means spirit, of an institution." A professor at Shandong Women's University writes, "At educational aspects, college culture can have an impact on students' professional qualities, moral character, and personality growth." With all this being said, the government's interaction is a heavy factor in the culture of a university, specifically public universities. The college receives a serious amount of income through the wealth redistribution from taxes. So, the government has an interest in promoting its values in the institutions they are investing in. Government intervention affects schools deeper than one might seem to think. For instance, let's talk about the creation of Sallie Mae. Sallie Mae was created in 1972 by the government to subsidize borrowers by having the government guarantee their loans. Since then, it has grown to be a provider of subsidized student loans with a government-granted monopoly over the market. Now, this all sounds good in theory. It allows colleges to be more affordable and thus allows people to reap the benefits of going to college. However, this government intervention was not what it hoped to be. Instead of lower tuition prices and making college more accessible and more affordable, it has made the tuition costs rise and has lowered the education quality for America's youth. Research from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York has shown that the college tuition increased by 60 cents for every dollar increase in government loans made available to students. In simpler terms, for every dollar taxpayers lend to students, 60 cents is taken by the college in the form of higher tuition, and thus is 60 cents more of student debt. It is safe to say that our government is the one raising the tuition cost, which is frankly no shock to see that the total student debt is approaching $2 trillion. Subsidized funding gives rise to higher tuition prices, which then causes an increase in the need for more subsidized funding. This is the revolving door of a government-funded education. Truly, the only winners of this cycle are the politicians who cater to the illusions of free and the colleges themselves, while the parents and the students lose. I've mentioned that the government's intervention is causing students to have a lower quality of education, but how? Colleges benefit from maximizing student enrollment. This means that the government gives the colleges money as long as the colleges can attract students. Due to this, the sad reality is that colleges are no longer academic institutions, but marketing machines. William Faulkner, an MBA student at Stanford University, states, "I blame bad policy. By not holding colleges accountable for poor student outcomes, the government is eroding college quality by empowering colleges to teach students not the skills that the market demands, but the skills that colleges think should be in demand. The consequence is that more than 40% of college graduates today are in jobs that don't even require a college degree." As one can see, the problem in investing in such a college where your morals are compromised and the government has a hold on you is that you simply turn into a marketing ploy. Most government-influenced universities only care for numbers, not the students. In To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, Lee criticizes public education by showing the strain it has on Scout. By the time Scout entered school, she already knew how to read and write, which is way more advanced than any first grader in her time. However, her teacher, Miss Caroline, impedes and stunts the growth of her education by telling her her father can no longer read to her since she is so advanced. In Chapter 2, we see Jem commit malapropism, which is the mistaken use of an incorrect word in the place of a similar sounding word, which then creates a nonsensical sentence. Jem says to Scout, "I'm trying to teach you the new way they were teaching the first grade, stubborn. It's the Dewey Decimal System." Lee does this intentionally. She means to criticize the education system. What Jem meant to refer to was John Dewey's system of education, instead of the Dewey Decimal System, which is an organizational system for library books. John Dewey was an American philosopher and a progressive educational reformer who is credited with a thought known as pragmatism, which has become the American education system. So, let's talk about the American education. As a child, and still to this day, we question the purpose of education, and it's not uncommon. For instance, you're sitting in class, listening to a lecture, and you're wondering, do I really need to know what happened during the Victorian era, or the storyline of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight? In hindsight, it all sounds trivial and impractical. No one uses that knowledge on a day-to-day basis once they graduate, so we only memorize them for a short term, which has been coined by the famous phrase, cram, pass, and forget. Thus, when we do learn what seems to us to be these rather trivial things, we only do it to pass an upcoming test and get a good grade in the class. In today's modern age, everything you do for some consequential, practical benefit. Philosophically, the school which only cares for consequences is called pragmatism. Pragmatism is the philosophical movement that claims that an idea or proposition is true only if it works satisfactorily. Those involved in this movement assess the truth in any given thing by its consequences. To summarize pragmatism, whatever works is what's good and true. The biggest influence of pragmatism is our American education. Sadly, most moderns tell themselves that the purpose of education is simply to make money. Well, let me break it down for you. We go to school and cram the material taught to us so that we can get good grades. With those good grades, we can get into a good college. After, we pick a career that can give us a good paycheck. We amass wealth only to die and prepare our kids to go through the same meaningless process. And it all starts with us now in high school. Our lives and our kids' lives are dependent on our success as a teenager. Or at least that's what pragmatism has taught us, to value money over virtue and wisdom. We do things only because it works, and thus we are only focused on the consequences of any given thing. Education alone has been transformed into a vessel where you make money. In Plato's Republic, Plato is shown to tell people to ask questions for themselves instead of just soaking up information for the mere sake of it. The philosophical style of critically examining everything is given by Socrates. This is known as the Socratic method. Socrates thought that we, as humans, should question absolutely everything and to not stop questioning until we know that our beliefs, or what we comprehend, lie on a secure foundation. Between a teacher and a student, the Socratic method is shown through the probing of questions by the teacher to explore the elemental beliefs that shape the student's views. According to the University of Notre Dame, the Socratic method leads the learner to find a clear and concise expression of knowledge by their way of reason. The Socratic method is how the impartation of wisdom and knowledge should occur, rather than the modern pragmatic approach, where the student is a computer and they are being programmed with information and are just simply expected to regurgitate facts. The student gains no real-world understanding. Instead, they just retain knowledge out of necessity, whereas the Socratic method helps guide the student to build a solid foundation on which their knowledge can stand. The modern pragmatic approach creates a person who is reliant on authority to tell them how to think or what to do. Thus, they become submissive instead of critical. As Albert Einstein once said, the important thing is to not stop questioning. Curiosity has its reasons for existence. One cannot help but be in awe when he contemplates the mysteries of eternity, of life, of the marvelous structures of reality. It is enough if one merely tries to comprehend a little of this mystery each day. Now, I need to state that wanting to be successful isn't bad at all. We should all want to be successful. We should all strive for success. But that is not the purpose of education, and even less a college education. Here's what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said about the purpose of education. The function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. But education that stops with efficiency may prove to be the greatest menace to society. The most dangerous criminal may be a man gifted with reason but no morals. We must remember that intelligence is not enough. Intelligence plus character, that is the true goal of education. To further prove King's point, British writer and philosopher C.S. Lewis says, education without values, as useful as it is, seems to make a man a more clever devil. To conclude this argument, let me state emphatically what education should be about. Education is the impartation of knowledge and culture. One must be given the opportunity to learn and acquire knowledge and skill that allows people to reach their full potential. To each individual, it will be different. For some, it might mean a university, but to others, this might mean hands-on experience in the working environment. Overall, a college education, taken in its totality, is more than just securing wealth. It involves careful thinking and consideration on whether college is right for you. The answer, whether you should or shouldn't attend, isn't simple. It is one that people must come to on their own accord. No one should use societal pressure to make you do something just because that's what society wants you to do. When making this decision in the future, think about your career. Think about what you want to do with your life. And then, if that points to attending university, make sure you are going for the right reasons. Attend a university that makes you a better and well-rounded person, not a university that only teaches you how to make money and let that be the only thing you gain after being in college for 4+ years. When you leave this thesis, I hope some of this sticks with you. So that when you stumble across the college question, whether that be this summer or in 3 years, you consider thinking about each aspect I have discussed in my thesis. Thank you.
Good job, Alex.
Thank you.
Let Mrs. Murdoch go last. She said she has hardly questions.
Okay.
Maybe. No, really well done. I'm curious about, you make an argument about the pragmatism that happens with college and college decisions. Is there any thought in your decision-making process as far as a Christian college versus a secular college, or even a classical Christian college, continuing your classical education? How would that factor into a decision-making process for which college to choose?
Well, I think it's different for each individual. It depends on what their goals are. For Christian colleges, you wouldn't have to worry about government interference, and so morals would align more, especially that we're all Christians in this here. So when thinking about college, you think, okay, Christian college, that lines up with my morals and my beliefs. Whereas classical colleges are focused on excellence. And so much like we are here, that's what they're focused on. But because they're so focused on excellence, they don't have government interference, and so the tuition is pricier. So that's something to consider.
Sure. And then you also talked about just education, kind of what it should be and how it should be formational. I'm curious about your thoughts on when you make a college decision, how does the second commandment of loving your neighbor, how does that factor into it when a lot of people choose colleges based on what it's done, what it's supposed to do for me? How does that second commandment of loving your neighbor, how should that factor into your decision?
Right. Well, in the Bible, we are given the 10 Commandments, but we are also given, inside those 10 Commandments, we're giving our two greatest commandments, which is love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, and mind, and strength, and love our neighbor as ourselves. So, in order to fulfill God's will and be Christians, we must integrate those two greatest commandments inside our everyday lives. And of course, college wouldn't be an exception to that, so we would include those two greatest commandments inside of our college decision.
Sure. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Good job, Alex.
Thank you.
I've got a couple questions for you. So my first one is that if a person chooses not to attend a university or pursue a bachelor's degree for whatever reason, we still have to make a living in this world. We still have to be able to provide. So would you say that some form of higher education, whether that's vocational training or an associate's degree, is still necessary for them to have a career? And I want to make the distinction between a career and a job. So.
I wouldn't say it's necessary. There are plenty of people throughout history that have worked straight out of high school and have moved up in the totem pole, and that's how they have their career. But I would say that compared to those that just have a diploma, a vocational or a technical school would be a better way to show that, okay, you have some training in this field. Let me throw you into this job and see how you do. So it's a plus, definitely.
Okay. My second question is more general. So within the context of your thesis, what makes a person successful in life?
Well, I'm going to go back to what I said to Mr. Lockyer, is that we have the 10 Commandments, and our role as humans in this earth is to fulfill God's promise and be stewards. And so we must love the Lord our God and love our neighbor. And if we are fulfilling those two commandments, then we are successful in this life.
Awesome, thank you.
Great job, Alex.
Thank you.
Almost finished.
Okay.
Okay, so on the financial aspect of things, you mentioned that a prospective college student should think first of the potential financial return of a degree. And as Mr. Smith said, of course, we have to be prepared to provide for ourselves. You mentioned specifically of thinking of how we are going to provide for ourselves or a family when we're making our decision. Specifically as Christians, we do want to be financially responsible, but why is the financial potential of an education even a factor at all in our choice for a career? Shouldn't our only priority be the will of God for the use of our personal gifts, and then we just entrust Him? As long as we're not pursuing something flighty that is just for enjoyment, shouldn't we just trust that God's going to make a way for us to provide for ourselves?
Well, we are called to fulfill the will of God. And in order to do that, we have to be able to maintain our families and ourselves. If we decide to have kids in the future, we have to be able to provide for them. And if we choose to attend a college and put ourselves in a massive amount of debt, and not knowing that if that career can provide a living for our kids, and those kids will be, starving, so we can't have that. So we need to be able to know that those kids will be provided for, we will be provided for, our spouse is provided for. And so that's why you need to consider the financial aspect.
Okay, very good. So this one's kind of a technical question. So I'm a teacher with a master's degree, and I have several years of experience, but I literally know people who are in other fields who have less experience and either not as high a degree or no degree at all, and even in entry-level positions, depending on what field they're in, they make a higher annual salary than I make. So when you mentioned that on average, those with a degree make more than those with just a high school diploma, was that kind of general across the board for all fields in the United States, or was it more just technical like engineering and computer sciences?
Upon the research that I have done, that was a statistic across all fields. Mm-hmm. However, with each statistic, there are exceptions. My parents did not even graduate with a high school diploma, and they have made a career for themselves and are able to provide for me and my siblings. And so Of course, there are exceptions, but that was just a broad statistic that I've researched upon.
Okay. And I'm going to combine my last two, make it a little easier on you. So as classical educators, we see the value in like immersing students in worldly cultures, even pagan cultures, so that we can teach them how to discern and then seek what is true, good, and beautiful. And you mentioned that Socrates advises us to question absolutely everything and to not stop questioning until we're able to know our own beliefs, which I would think never really ends. Doesn't this kind of imply that all education is valuable and that we should continue questioning until we have certainty? And if that's the case, if you have a high school graduate and they're deciding whether or not they can go to college, if they can do so without it putting a heavy debt burden on them or their families, shouldn't we just advise them that it's better to just go ahead and choose to go?
Okay. Well, I'm going to dissect your question a little bit. So it's not either or. We shouldn't just consider the education aspect and disregard the financial aspect and vice versa. We have to consider both. And then the second part of your question was that if we should just encourage them, right? I wouldn't say encourage them. I would say offer them different paths. So Mr. Smith mentioned vocational or technical school. That is a great way for a student who's just coming out of high school to realize if that's what they want to do, or take a gap year. You know, that's a great way for high school students to also realize what they want to do with their life. Because if we just encourage them, then they can feel pressured, and then when they do go to college, they'll realize that that college wasn't for them or college isn't for them at all. Then they're in a massive amount of debt, and they're just confused on what they want to do and have wasted valuable time. And they could have been spending to realize what they did actually want to do with their lives.
All right, thank you. Great job.
Thank you.
Great job, Alex. We'll just sit tight for a few minutes here while we do the transition. So just give us a few minutes. All right, if you could all make your way back to your seats, I would like to invite Cohen Koch to the stage to be able to introduce Ian Mills.
Hello, everybody. My name is Cohen Koch, and I'm here to introduce Ian Mills. Ian Mills is one of the best seniors I've ever had the pleasure of being educated at the same establishment as, and one of my favorite seniors of Vietnamese origin of all time. He is planning on pursuing a major in biology at Texas Tech, and I wish him nothing but the best in all of his future endeavors and in his immediate endeavor of senior thesis. Please let me welcome to the stage Ian Mills.
Thank you, Cohen. Let me start with this story. Fire trucks reported to the scene after an early morning call to a house fire. Inside the extinguished house, police find a pregnant mother beaten to death, her body laying hopelessly on the bed, completely incinerated by the fire. In a different room, there lies the beaten body of the woman's 5-year-old daughter, motionless, burned beyond recognition. The murderer's father-in-law is seen in the same situation as the little girl lying next to the bed. A suspect is brought in, and after his first interview with the police, the man claims that he was at a store and not at home during the time of the crime. However, the same criminal was later apprehended at the California-Mexico border, where he confessed to the crimes of stabbing and beating his wife and leaving her, and then beating the other 2 victims before setting the house to fire. At the scene, the victims looked like they had died before the house was set on fire. Criminal investigators found the weapons and were able to match the victims' and criminals' DNA through evidence recovered at the scene. Incarcerated in 2009, the admitted murderer remained in prison until 2011, when a judge sentenced him to death for his crimes. He continued to stay in prison until the date of his execution, which was scheduled in March of 2020. However, it was postponed due to the COVID pandemic. At 6 p.m. on June 30th, 2021, the postponed execution date, he walked to the death chamber where he was to be executed in Huntsville, Texas. On the gurney, he was allowed to say his last words, which were, quote, "I truly regret killing my family. I am thankful for all the thoughts and prayers from my family over the past few days. I love each and every one of you." At 6:49 p.m. on June 30th, 2021, John Hummel was pronounced dead after being given a lethal dose of potassium chloride. There he is. Did John Hummel deserve to die? Is it the government's authority to say whether he should live or die due to his actions? In the case of John Hummel, he was an ex-Marine and experienced post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. There is a study that veterans that experience PTSD have a higher chance of having various other personality disorders. That year, John Hummel and a Nevada death row inmate and ex-Marine by the name of Zane Floyd both experienced severe PTSD due to their service and were sentenced to death that summer. However, both committed heinous crimes, and the court deemed it appropriate that they be put to death. Is this just? Is it right? In the tragic case of John Hummel, I would deem it appropriate. But why? Let me tell you another story about a man named Jeffrey Dahmer. Dahmer was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on May 21st, 1960, to Lionel and Joyce Dahmer. He was described as an energetic and happy child until the age of 4, when surgery to correct a double hernia seemed to effect a change in the boy. Noticeably subdued, he became increasingly withdrawn following the birth of his younger brother and the family's frequent moves. By his early teens, he was disengaged, tense, and largely friendless. Jeffrey Dahmer was an American serial killer who took the lives of 17 men between 1978 and 1991. He was responsible for doing absolutely heinous crimes that are offensively graphic in nature beyond explanation. He hunted his victims like prey, and after their brutal murders, he further disgraced their deaths and families by showing no remorse. Dahmer was captured in 1991 and sentenced to 15 life terms. Before he could be executed, he was murdered by fellow prison inmate Christopher Scarver in 1994. Yet, here is something unimaginable. After killing numerous people, being a sex offender, drugging people, and committing acts of cannibalism, Dahmer was not eligible for the death penalty. Why is this? For committing multiple heinous crimes and taking away the lives of many people, he didn't deserve to die? The reason is simple. The state he was tried in, Wisconsin, prohibited the death penalty. This essentially means that there is little to no chance of Jeffrey Dahmer being put to death. More on that later. To better understand what the death penalty is all about and what it entails, let's get some things straight. The death penalty is used as a form of punishment. According to the Oxford Dictionary, punishment is the infliction or imposition of a penalty as retribution for an offense. For the sake of being fair, punishments should fit the crime. When a punishment fits the crime and the punishment is a consequence for the actions, then that punishment would serve as an incentive to make a person refrain from a criminal act. The punishment, therefore, should deter people from doing their crime. Individual deterrence is the aim of punishment to discourage the offender from criminal acts in the future. The belief is that when punished, offenders recognize the unpleasant consequences of their actions on themselves and will change their behavior accordingly. For the sake of simplicity, I will be limiting this subject only to the US and relate only to US laws, methods, and morals. Many people have different opinions on whether the death penalty should continue in this day and age. Some think that it is barbaric and antiquated, and that instead of putting criminals to death, they deserve a second chance through rehabilitation or just therapy or jail time. Those in favor of the death penalty, such as myself, would say that they do not deserve that second chance, because if we want true fairness and equality, then the rights of the victims should be the priority, and therefore the criminal does not deserve any second chance, and the authorities at hand should enforce the death penalty because it is just and fair. One argument for those that support the death penalty is retributivism. Retributivists approach justifying the amount of punishment for misconduct by looking back to aspects of the wrongdoing committed. There are many different forms and versions of retributivism. All maintain a tight, essential link between the offense voluntarily committed and the amount, form, or kind of punishment justifiably threatened or imposed. Future effects or consequences, if any, are then irrelevant or distinctly secondary considerations to justifying punishments for misconduct, including the death penalty. Retributivism concerning capital punishment often prominently appeals to the principle of lex talionis, or the law of retaliation, an idea popularly familiarized in the ancient and biblical phrase, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Forms of retributivism vary according to the interpretation of lex talionis or in the appeal to alternative moral notions such as basic moral rights or a principle of fairness. Those favoring capital punishment say that society should support those practices that will bring about the greatest balance of good over evil, and capital punishment is one such practice. Capital punishment benefits society because it may deter violent crime. While it is difficult to produce direct evidence to support this claim, since, by definition, those who are deterred by the death penalty do not commit additional murders, common sense tells us that if people know that they will die if they perform a certain act, they will be more unwilling to perform that act. If the threat of death has, in fact, the hand of many would-be murderers, and we abolish the death penalty, we will forsake the lives of many innocent victims whose murders could have been deterred. But if, in fact, the death penalty does not deter and we continue to impose it, we have only sacrificed the lives of convicted murderers. It is definitely better for society to take a gamble that the death penalty does deter in order to protect the lives of innocent people than to take a gamble that it does not deter and thereby protect the lives of murderers while risking the lives of innocents. If grave risks are to be taken, it's better that they be taken by the guilty and not the innocent. I hope that people would want to value their lives and think of their lives as important. With that, when you value your life, you must acknowledge that the lives of other people are also valuable. And with that, because other people value their own lives, you should value their lives as well. There are several ways that we value human life. One way we value life is for their instrumental value. We might claim that a human life can be measured by the good it gives the world. There are things that other people can do that you can't do. That adds value to a life. There will always be something that someone else is better at than you are. Likewise, you have abilities and make contributions that are not possible for others. When you kill someone, you obviously and consciously think that person's life you took has a much lesser value to the point you don't want them to exist anymore. When you kill somebody, it also devalues your own life. You don't think that there is value in that person's life, and assuming that person was human and we apply that same philosophy to everyone, then you don't value the lives of all human beings, including yourself. This should be punishable, not because you don't think that your life has value, because one can change the way he thinks about him or herself, but because you don't think that there's any value in any human left to live their life, thus justifying you becoming a murderer and therefore punishable by death because your reaction to there being no value in humans means there is no value in the murderer existing either. Some people think that the deterrence theory for the death penalty is ineffective. There is no proof that the deterrence theory is always effective. Studies show that there is no definite correlation between whether the institution of the death penalty has actually caused people to refrain from performing a heinous crime. As a matter of fact, sending criminals to a lifetime sentence in prison with no chance of parole has a higher rate of deterring others from wanting to commit any type or kind of crime. This can be explained with a simple explanation. If we compare the amount of death sentences handed out to the amount of life sentences handed out, there can be a better and more accurate statistic taken when dealing with deterrence. With the death penalty, because there are so few handed out, the study can't be performed accurately. Therefore, the study of life sentences deterring crime to the death penalty deterring crime is misleading. It is also hard to perform a study on this because those to whom the death penalty has been applied are quite frankly dead. However, when we put together the meanings of each term concerning the death penalty, retribution, punishment, and deterrence, then they match up and work together. When you commit a crime that is punishable by death, it is a justified punishment and will serve as retribution for your crime. When people see that this is the negative result of a certain act, it causes them to not want to perform that act. This is a deterrent at work. A great example of this statistic is how back in the early to mid-90s, the crime rate was at a low in the US and the death penalty was predominant at that time. Some would argue that this is an inaccurate statistic and that it doesn't apply. There were other studies saying that there were other reasons for why the crime rate was so low. Some reasons are absurd, such as the abortion rate was higher, so that caused there to be less chance of potential criminals. Other findings were more valid, such as the amount of people being sentenced to prison was higher and the number of policing jobs were higher. If that is the case, can we also apply this to the death penalty? If a life sentence in prison is enough, then can your life on the line also serve as a deterrent? When you think about it from a different perspective and use it in a metaphorical way, Newton's third law of energy says it perfectly. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Through the eyes of the justice system, this should cause you to think that whenever you commit a crime, there will be a consequence later that you will have to pay, whether it be monetary or in a different form, such as your life. When you think about it, if your life is on the line, then you will be thinking about the things that you could have done differently to not get yourself into that position in the first place. When you say that you're against the death penalty, are you therefore saying that you are protecting the lives of the murderer? Capital punishment is often defended on the grounds that society has a moral obligation to protect the safety and welfare of its citizens. Murderers threaten this safety and welfare. Only by putting murderers to death can society ensure that convicted killers do not kill again. As previously explained, if the threat of death has in fact stayed the hand of many would-be murderers and we abolish the death penalty, we will sacrifice the lives of many innocent victims whose murders could have been prevented. But if the death penalty does not deter and we continue to impose it, we have only sacrificed the lives of convicted murderers. It is therefore better for society to take a gamble that the death penalty deters in order to protect the lives of innocent people than to take a gamble that it doesn't deter and thereby protect the lives of murderers while risking the lives of innocents. To answer one of the questions posed from earlier, did John Hummel deserve to die? Should he have gone to a rehabilitation center so that he could have a second chance? After these previous reasons for why we should have the death penalty, he definitely deserves to die. He bound and beat to death his wife, daughter, and stepfather, and then burned their bodies along with his own home. While we still aren't 100% sure the reason why he decided to commit his crimes, we do know that he did suffer from PTSD as an ex-Marine. Some people may find this as an excuse for rehabilitation for Mr. Hummel. However, this can be seen as not a valid reason for rehabilitation, as stated earlier, because John Hummel was later apprehended at the California-Mexico border, which is far away from their residence. His escape to Mexico also gives reason to why he should deserve death because he was trying to escape his crimes, which also gives reason to believe that he knew what he did was terribly wrong to the point where he would escape to a different country. Lastly, this also gives reason that his PTSD is not a valid reason for his crimes because he did try to escape his crimes, and he also said right before being executed that he regrets what he did. In the case of Jeffrey Dahmer, what he did was absolutely inexcusable. The things he did, such as drugging and killing men, are absolutely unfathomable. Imagine if that was your own body. When the officers got to the scene, they found multiple dismembered parts of bodies, some of which are perfectly preserved. They also found Polaroid photos of his victims before and after death, which instantly gave solid evidence that Dahmer was the murderer. Upon that, Dahmer even admitted that he was the one who did it while on trial. He said that he knew what he did was wrong to multiple interviewers and reporters. He also claims that he believes he deserved death for the mass murdering that he was responsible for. Instead of death, he got 15 consecutive life sentences. Why is this so? The reason is simple. Wisconsin abolished the death penalty way back in 1853, long before Dahmer was tried. Dahmer had very little to no chance of getting the death penalty that he deserved. Eventually, he was killed by one of the prisoners a little over 2 years after being incarcerated. Though Dahmer is dead, his punishment did not add up to what he did. In other words, he still got to walk, though in cuffs and prison hallways, when he completely ruthlessly took the lives of multiple men, and now they have no chance of pursuing a God-given life. When a crime has been committed, we want justice to be served. Yet this requires an objective definition of justice and how it is to be administered. In the US, this is accomplished by our justice system. The role of the justice system is to provide an action determined by a panel of unbiased jurors that provides a response to a crime and conforms to the facts of the case in the expectation of reasonable consequences. And believing that this definition is accurate and assuming that we want our justice system to be just and conform to the laws that are reasonable, the consequences of criminal acts must be applied based not on an emotional perception of fairness, but rather the measure of the deeds of the offender. This is why it is for the government, the people who are put in this position, to decide whether a man should walk or die based on the actions committed. The government officials are to abide by the laws put in place so that we can retain order and balance. They are to judge without bias and according to the symbolic nature of Lady Justice. The rights of the offender have been taken away when the offender took away the rights of the victim. In order to maintain balance and order in our system, the life of a man that has been taken away without just cause must mean the same consequence applies to the offender. We must respect this and honor the meaning of the death penalty. It is not only a punishment, prevention, or protection, it is the law. And when states take away that law or abolish it, they have lost or forgotten the meaning of the death penalty. We must keep this philosophy of our justice system and continue to use it. Thank you.
Good job, Ian. So let me start with kind of a simple one, I hope. Given the number of wrongful convictions, is it wise for us to have an irreversible punishment such as the death penalty as a consequence for a crime?
Okay, so, well, I mean, the point of the death penalty is so that it is irreversible. But with the amount of wrongful convictions is, in fact, a very low number, especially with the death penalty. However, that is the reason why we do have long trials. And on average, a death penalty trial ranges from 5 to 7, maybe 10 years long. That's the reason why it's so long. We must have each and every piece of evidence and all the information possible to make a just decision.
Okay. As Christians, can we righteously support the death penalty if we know for a fact that there will be people punished by death that we happen to know for a fact are not saved?
Okay, so to receive salvation, once Jesus died on the cross and rose, and when the veil was torn. The church was made available to everybody, especially with nowadays, we have technology, we have Bibles literally sitting in front of the pew in front of you. But to those who salvation was not made apparent or not made available to them, I do know for a fact that before the murder or whoever the convicted criminal goes to the death chamber, they do have the choice to consult with a pastor or priest or a religious official to talk things over and make a decision.
Got you, thank you. And one more. The law of the Old Testament permitted the death penalty for certain acts, but when Christ came, he said that only those who were without sin could impose such a penalty. Doesn't that imply that by the forgiveness of Christ once for all, we have no right to take the life of anyone else as a punishment for a crime?
Okay, so I know that Exodus 21:12 says, if a man strikes another so that he dies, so too shall he die. And also in the Ten Commandments, it says, thou shalt not murder. However, whenever Jesus did narrow down all of the commandments into 2 commandments, that being love God and love neighbor, nowhere in there did he ever say, thou shalt enforce the death penalty or anything along those lines. However, Jesus did pay his respect to the government by saying, that which belongs to Caesar, which means that the government does have the decision, and the government is the authority put in place to make those decisions. Alongside that, Paul in Romans did say that the government does have the ability to own the sword, which means lay down consequences where they see fit. And because that's put in the Bible is not wrong, and so we must abide by that.
Okay, great job, Ian.
Good job, Ian.
Thank you.
I have a couple questions for you.
Mm-hmm.
So, you said it yourself, death penalty cases take a very long time
Yes.
to try. So research has shown that once a person has been convicted of a crime and is sentenced to death, that the financial burden on society to allow that convict to exhaust all of their available appeals, which takes even more time, to house and to feed them, and then ultimately to put them to death, is greater than a sentence of life in prison, which allows for fewer appeals. So to put that simply, it costs more money to sentence someone to death than it is to sentence them to life in prison. So does this change your perspective on your thesis? Why or why not?
That's a good question, and that's actually a reason why a lot of people are against the death penalty is because of how much money the government puts into it. Like, one case could be as high as like $3 million over the span of that 5 to 10 years. However, that is the reason why it does take so long, is because the amount of lawyers, the amount of jurors, the amount of judges that you have to go through, all of them get paid, and it is through the government, and all of them do require a lot of money. Lawyers are expensive. However, when you compare this to like life sentences, like you said, life sentences are handed out more often than death penalty cases. And so like the relative amount is kind of misleading because the death penalty, there may be only like 3 cases a year, whereas like a life sentence is like 10, maybe 15 sentences a year. So the reason why it's expensive is, yeah, because it does take so long, but there's only like 3 a year that occurs.
Okay. My second question is, with the waning societal acceptance of the death penalty and the increasing difficulty in the procurement of the drugs traditionally administered for execution, do you foresee a future where capital punishment is no longer practical, or one where those states who continue to hand down capital punishment have figured out another way to continue the practice? If so, can you provide examples of what lengths certain states have gone to so that capital punishment can continue? And at what point do those methods used to continue executing convicts cross the line into cruel and unusual?
Can you go back to your first question?
Yeah, so
That was like 10 questions.
I guess to put it more simply, it's society, most of society is kind of moving away from the death penalty. drug companies don't want to produce those drugs anymore
Correct.
because they don't want to be involved. So it's getting harder to carry out the death penalty. So for the states that want to continue to practice the death penalty, can you provide examples of what lengths they've gone to do that? And if that continues, at what point does that kind of cross the line into cruel and unusual for those methods?
Okay, so the most popular method of sentencing someone to life or killing someone, for lack of better terms, is through lethal injection. Is it called a 3-drug protocol? There's an anesthetic, there's a muscle relaxant, and then there's the lethal dose of potassium chloride or what other drug they may use to put them into immediate cardiac arrest, and it's irreversible. So that one, the actual injection itself is not expensive. However, you did mention that some states don't want to provide that drug because they don't want to be involved in it. I remember researching that the reason why we don't use pentobarbital as an anesthetic anymore is because it was provided by Britain, and Britain obviously doesn't use the death penalty as we do, so they didn't want to be involved in that. However, compared to what our founding fathers of America experienced before they came to America, in Britain, they experienced some wild, crazy forms of death, such as hanging, such as drawn hanging quarters, such as the guillotine, getting the head chopped off, tortured, beatings. And so compared to those gruesome ways of killing somebody, we decided to do something that is quick, easy, methodical, and still has the same form in the end, which is death, and that's the punishment in the end.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, wait, sorry. To answer one of your questions from earlier was that do I foresee states not using it anymore? Is that, yeah, it is a growing trend that states do decide to fade away from it, such as Wisconsin when they abolished it in 1853. That's why Dahmer was not tried for death. And that may be the case in nowadays. However, this is why I'm giving this thesis, is to further enforce the death penalty, and that it is a philosophy that we must continue to use and respect it for what it is.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good job, Ian.
Thank you.
One of the reasons that a lot of states are moving away from the death penalty is that there is a disproportionate number of minorities and those from low socioeconomic standings, and that the argument is that it's a biased system against those people. How would you refute that in regards to defending the use of the death penalty in regards to racial and economic biases?
So yes, that is an important question to ask because that is something that everybody worries about. We must first understand that we do live in a fallen world, and of course bias will be shown in every aspect of our lives. However, with our current justice system and the amount of trials that we go through, we try not to show that or have any of it for that matter, so that we can ensure that the proper punishment fits the crime according to the law that is put in place.
Another common argument against the death penalty is that as Christians, we are commanded to not murder, and that it may look like you are murdering someone for the death penalty. How is the death penalty not considered murder?
Well, the same question could also be applied in times of war, like when you kill somebody, is that considered murder, or is that just how war is played? With the justice system, that's how it is that when you commit a heinous crime that results in death and the consequence calls for you shall die too, then that's how it is. In war, if you're commanded to go take down a fort, you will go take down that fort, and it's not considered murder, it's your job. And that's why these governing authorities are put in place to enforce that rule.
Okay. All right, well done.
Thank you.
Yep.
Great job to you both. One more round of applause for both of them. Have a wonderful day. That's it.